I stood there holding the gravy boat, steam curling between us, as my son slid into the head of the table like he owned it. "You're just a guest here now," he said, smiling the way people do when they know it'll sting. The seat had been his father's. The house, mine. The silence after his words was louder than any prayer he'd just led. After 3 decades of hosting, feeding, forgiving, after building this home brick by brick with my own hands, I realized I'd cooked my last meal for someone who thought he could evict me from my own life. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The turkey was still steaming when Greg slid into the head of the table like he'd been sitting there his whole life. Dorothy stood frozen for half a beat, the carved bird balanced in her hands, carving knife pressed awkwardly against the breast. That seat had always belonged to Bill, her late husband. No one had sat there since he passed, until now. "Mom, want me to take that?" Greg asked, already halfway out of his chair, smiling the kind of smile people wear when they're already doing what they claim to be asking about. He didn't wait for an answer. He took the knife, the fork, the bird, and the moment. "Let's bow our heads," he said, like he was the one who bought the house, the table, the linen napkins pressed into maple leaf folds. Amanda, his wife with the realtor smile, squeezed his hand as he cleared his throat for grace. Emily, their teenage daughter, glanced at her phone under the table, thumb frozen mid-scroll. Dorothy clasped her hands in her lap. Greg's voice was smooth, polished. "Heavenly Father, thank you for this roof, this table, this food, and for family, the ones who show up and step up. Amen." He opened his eyes to a table full of nods, except hers. The seating chart had been rearranged too. She noticed it the second she walked in. Greg at the head, Amanda beside him, Emily next, then the rest. His in-laws, a neighbor couple from across the cul-de-sac, even Pastor Ron and his wife, Cheryl. Dorothy had been seated at the far end, flanked by folding chairs that didn't match the set. She didn't say a word, but inside, something old and painful flickered to life. The meal unfolded like a performance. Greg corrected her twice on the stuffing, once on the seasoning, once on the method. "You've got to toast the bread first, Mom. Otherwise, it just soaks and turns soggy. That's how Amanda does it, right, babe?" Amanda laughed softly, buttering a roll. "He's a snob now. I created a monster." Dorothy forced a smile and reached for the cranberry sauce. No one asked her about the recipe she made every year. No one complimented the roasted yams that had caramelized just right. The pie she'd baked from scratch, pecan, Bill's favorite, sat untouched, while Amanda's pumpkin creation was passed around like it was gold-dusted. After dessert was served, Dorothy stood to clear a few plates and offered gently, "I'll wrap some up for the Perkinses. They're alone this year." Greg didn't look up. "You're just a guest here now, Mom. Let the hosts handle it." The clatter of forks stopped. Amanda's lips twitched, not quite a smile, more like a reward. Emily flinched and looked away. Dorothy held the edge of the table for balance, one hand still wrapped in a dish towel. The air in the room thinned. She sat back down without a word. Her eyes flicked to the empty seat beside her, the one Bill used to occupy, always with a second helping and a quiet joke. She imagined him watching this scene, arms crossed, brow heavy with that old-school anger he used to hide behind measured silence. Dorothy said nothing, but inside, her chest began to tighten, not with grief this time, with heat, with something sharp. The next time she looked up, Greg was toasting to new traditions. Her pie was still untouched. The morning after Thanksgiving, Dorothy sat at the kitchen table in the same flannel robe she'd worn every Black Friday since the mid-90s. Steam rose from her coffee, the windows fogged. The house was quiet again, finally, and the silence felt like a bruise she kept pressing just to feel the sting. On the table, a yellow manila folder. Inside it, the facts. She flattened the first sheet with deliberate care. The original mortgage document, October 3rd, 1988. Bill's signature, hers. $142,000 at 9.8% interest. Back then, that had felt like gambling with the moon. Behind it, the payoff letter from the bank. April 2010, loan satisfied. No balance. Their home, free and clear. Greg's name was nowhere, not on the deed. Not on the mortgage. Not on the fire insurance policy she pulled from the green accordion file marked Emergency Docs. She stared at the policy, tapping it once with her finger. Greg had never owned this house, not even a corner of it, not even in spirit. She reached under the table and pulled up a cardboard banker's box. Bills, statements, maintenance receipts. She sifted through water bills from 2002, a roofing estimate from 2006, even the warranty for the garbage disposal that Bill installed himself before the arthritis made it too hard to get under the sink. All in her name, all hers. She opened a new folder and slid the documents in, one by one, like she was packing ammunition. Label, home control, reset. She stared at the words a moment, then underlined them, twice. The front door creaked open half an hour later. Ruth didn't knock. She never did. Best friends from the block didn't need to. She carried in 2 pumpkin lattes, the expensive kind from the cafe near the elementary school. I brought caffeine and judgment, Ruth announced, setting them down on the table. Which one you need more? Dorothy didn't smile, not fully, but her shoulders dropped. Just enough. I've been thinking, she said. He sat at that table like he'd signed a title. Oh, he's been practicing that move since Bill's funeral, Ruth muttered, pulling off her scarf. The man probably bookmarked furniture catalogs from the hospice room. Dorothy passed her the insurance documents, then the mortgage, then the utility bills, one after another like playing cards. Ruth flipped through them, eyes narrowing. He's not on a single one of these, she asked. Not one, Dorothy said. Not the deed, not the will, not even the snowplow contract. Ruth snorted. Well, damn, that boy's squatting in a will that hasn't even been written yet. Dorothy sipped her coffee, lips just barely touching the lid. He treats this house like it's been promised. But I never promised him anything. Ruth leaned in. Do you want him out? Dorothy didn't answer right away. She looked toward the living room where Greg's coat still hung on the back of the recliner. His scent, cheap cologne and aftershave, lingered in the hallway like a bad memory. I want him to remember, she said quietly, that this house wasn't built for him. Not by him. Not with him. Ruth's face softened. Then maybe it's time you put that in writing. Dorothy nodded once. I already started. The receptionist had offered her a coffee she didn't want and a form she didn't need. Dorothy waved both off with a quiet thank you and sank into the low leather chair outside Mark Belden's office, hands folded around her purse like it was holding something fragile. It wasn't, just paperwork. But still, she held it like a heartbeat. The waiting room was modern and muted. Beige walls, brushed chrome light fixtures. A fake plant that didn't even pretend to need sun. The only noise was the quiet tick of a wall clock above the door. It reminded her of the one in her old middle school's nurse's office. Same artificial calm. Same sense of waiting for something to sting. Mark opened his door right on time. Dorothy, he said, like they were just picking up a conversation instead of lighting a match. She followed him inside, settling into the leather guest chair as he slid into the desk across from her. No small talk. That was part of why she'd come back to him. She didn't need to explain what she'd already decided. He opened a yellow legal pad, clicked his pen. What are we doing today? I want it untangled, she said. Clean, private, no gaps left for confusion. He nodded once. You're talking about the house? Yes, and everything tied to it. I want to make sure Greg has no legal, financial, or imagined claim to anything. Not now, not ever. Mark blinked once, set the pen down for a moment. Understood. Do you want to sell it outright? She shook her head. Not publicly, not yet. If I hang a for sale sign on the front lawn, I might as well deliver Greg a handwritten insult. I don't want to fight. I want distance. Mark leaned back in his chair, thinking. We can do a quiet pre-market listing. I'll connect you with a private buyer channel, mostly investors, no emotional strings. The house goes on their radar, not the neighborhood's. Dorothy nodded. That's what I want. And we'll need to move the title first, he said, pulling a thin stack of forms from his drawer. Transfer it into a revocable living trust. Your name only. That way, you control it completely. And when it sells, there's no inheritance trail. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Good. I assume you want to update the will as well? I brought it with me, she said, unzipping her bag. The folder inside was already tabbed and highlighted. I've made my edits. He's removed entirely. No residue, no obligations. Mark flipped through the old will, nodding slowly. You've been thorough. I've had time. He set it aside and reached for his laptop. The keyboard clacked in clean, efficient bursts as he pulled up the draft trust and property documents. When he turned the screen toward her, her name was already typed in bold at the top. Dorothy stared at it for a moment before picking up the pen. Her signature wasn't as smooth as it used to be, but it was hers, and this time, it meant something. Mark gathered the signed pages into a neat stack and slid a copy into a folder for her. I'll file the trust with the county clerk. Should be official by midweek. Once that's in place, we can connect you with the private buyer group. Quiet as you like, she nodded. Thank you, Mark. He glanced up. You don't need to thank me, but I will say, it's rare someone walks in this prepared. Dorothy smiled faintly, folding the papers and placing them back in her bag. I spent years cleaning up after Greg. I just decided to do it on paper this time. She rose slowly, buttoned her coat. The cold would hit harder today. She could feel it in her knees. Still, there was a lightness to her spine as she walked toward the exit. Mark stood and held the door open, respectful without ceremony. She paused on the threshold, looked back once, not at him but at the folder still resting on his desk, stamped with her name. Her name. Alone. Without attachments or asterisks. She gave a polite nod and stepped into the hallway. The receptionist smiled, offered her that coffee again. This time, Dorothy accepted it. Cream, no sugar. She didn't need sweetening today. Greg's text came in at 8:41 a.m. sharp. Hey, Mom. Amanda said you seemed quiet on Thanksgiving. Everything okay? Dorothy read it once, then again. No punctuation, except for the question mark. No warmth. Just the usual vague flicker of performance that passed for concern in Greg's vocabulary. The kind of message someone sends so they can say they tried. She tapped back a single line. No need to worry, I've got things handled. She didn't wait for the read receipt. She silenced her phone and dropped it into the side pocket of her purse, where the volume button always got stuck under her lipstick tube. Then she zipped it shut. By 10 a.m., she was in Ruth's garage, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, sweat clinging at the back of her neck. The air smelled like mulch and old Christmas wreaths. They had cleared a corner for her things. Boxes labeled important, personal, to sort later, all tucked beside Ruth's old treadmill and a crate of garden stakes. I can make more room if you want, Ruth offered, handing her a roll of bubble wrap. No, this is enough, Dorothy said. It's just what matters. She had started with the valuables. Her wedding china, her mother's engagement ring, the file boxes from Bill's desk, and the quilt that her sister had made in the 80s, now faded but irreplaceable. Things Greg wouldn't even notice until they were gone, maybe not even then. They took 4 trips, spread out over the course of a week. Quiet, careful, no trace left behind. By Friday, the last of it was out of the house. That afternoon, she met Tina Ramos at the side entrance of the local title and private sales office. Tina had been Amanda's realtor once, years ago, before Amanda started using her cousin. But Dot had remembered her. Professional, discreet, and more interested in clean deals than small talk. I was surprised when I saw your name pop up, Tina said, as she opened the conference room door. This is a little hush-hush, huh? I need it handled quietly, Dot said. They don't know I'm listing. Tina didn't flinch. Good timing, then. You said they'd be out of town. December 15th. Visiting Amanda's parents in Asheville. They'll be gone 3 nights, Friday through Monday. Tina nodded and pulled out her tablet. We'll schedule the private walkthrough for Saturday. By invite only. Pre-qualified buyers. I'll draft the paperwork and keep your name off all internal notes until you say, go. Dorothy looked over the listing draft. It was sparse, elegant, just the way she'd asked. No sentimental language, no flowery photos, just a house, walls, a roof, a price. Make sure no one leaves a flyer behind, Dorothy added. Not even in the trash. I want the house to look exactly the same when they come back. Understood. She signed the pre-listing agreement, slid the pen back to Tina, and stood. They didn't shake hands. There was no need. It wasn't a deal made in hope. It was one made in precision. That night, Dot packed alone. She moved room to room, a steady, practiced rhythm. One box for storage, one for donation, one for trash. She worked without music, without wine, without distractions. Just the soft thud of closing cardboard and the creak of old floorboards under her feet. In the hall closet, she found the sweater Bill used to wear on Sunday. Mornings, still sealed in a dry cleaning bag. She held it to her chest a moment, then folded it carefully and laid it in a small box labeled Ours. She was halfway through sealing another box when Emily's voice floated down the hall. "Grandma," Dorothy turned. Emily stood by the doorway, school backpack slung over one shoulder, thumb hooked through the strap. "What are you doing?" she asked, eyes flicking to the packed boxes. Dorothy wiped her hands on her jeans. "Are you leaving?" There was no suspicion in her voice, just curiosity. Something raw and open, like a child asking if the sky might rain later. Dorothy looked her straight in the eye. "Yes," she said. "And they are too." Emily blinked, unsure what that meant. She opened her mouth to ask, but Dorothy was already sealing the box shut. The envelope was heavier than she expected. Dorothy slid her thumb beneath the sealed flap and eased it open slowly, like unwrapping something fragile. Inside was the final certified title, newly recorded, clean and absolute. Her name stood alone, typed in sharp black ink across the top margin. Dorothy Elaine Carver, sole owner. No addendums, no contingencies, no next of kin. She pressed her palm flat across the page. It was smooth, uncreased, unmarred by anyone else's ambition. For a long moment, she just sat at the table, the title beside her coffee mug. The morning sun crawling across the floor like time itself slowing down to watch. She didn't smile, but something behind her ribs finally let go. Later that day, she met Mark in his office again. He was already drafting the possession notice by the time she arrived. "It's not personal," he said quietly, tapping his pen, "but it will feel that way to him." "It already does," she replied. "Even when I say nothing." He slid the notice across the table. The wording was clinical, detached. Eviction by legal authority, not family friction. Greg had 30 days from the date of delivery. No exceptions. No mediation. She nodded. "Do you want it served in person?" he asked. "By courier," she said. "I don't want him making it a scene." Mark jotted a note on the form. "That'll cost a little extra." Dorothy opened her checkbook without hesitation. Worth every cent. When she returned home, she found Emily waiting at the dining room table, backpack still half-zipped, papers spilling out like a life in progress. "You're really doing it," Emily said. Dorothy didn't sit. She placed the folder on the sideboard and walked to the kitchen. Her movements careful, exact. "It's not what you think," she said. Emily stood, followed. Couldn't you have talked to Dad first? Given him a chance?" "I gave him years," Dorothy said, without turning. "This isn't sudden, it's just final. He's going to flip out." "No, he won't." She finally looked at her. "Because it won't be a fight. It'll be a lock change." Emily's mouth opened, then closed again. Dorothy softened, not in tone, but in pace. "You're allowed to love him, Emmy. You should. But don't ask me to pretend I owe him peace when he never once earned it." That night, she called Ruth. "I need a witness," she said simply. "I'll be there," Ruth replied. No questions. Together, they reviewed the plan. The courier would serve the notice Saturday morning, just after Greg and Amanda touched down in Asheville. Ruth would meet him at the door with a copy and a firm hand. The locks would be changed Monday morning by a vetted locksmith who'd already done work on the neighborhood church. Discreet, quiet, gone before the neighbors noticed. There would be no confrontation, no argument, just a handoff and a slow, surgical unraveling of Greg's imagined control. The next day, Dorothy booked a room at the downtown Wyndham for the transition days. 3 nights, same suite she and Bill had once stayed in for their 25th anniversary. Room 214, overlooking the courthouse square. She didn't want to sleep in the house during the handoff. Not while it transformed from sanctuary to transaction. She packed her overnight bag carefully, 2 blouses, 1 good pair of shoes, her crossword book, and a navy wool coat she hadn't worn since Bill's funeral. She laid a single pair of earrings beside the bag. Gold, small, steady. She hadn't worn hoops in years. Today didn't seem the time to start. She zipped the bag shut and checked the hotel confirmation one last time. Her name was at the top. No one else's. As she turned off the bedroom light, her eyes caught the small framed photograph on the dresser. Bill, squinting into the sun, holding a rake like a rifle, one boot missing its sole. Behind him the house, still half-painted, still wholly theirs. Dorothy didn't cry. She hadn't in weeks. But her hand hovered over the photo before she let it be. And for the first time since Bill passed, she didn't feel like a visitor in her own life. Dorothy stepped over the loose stair tread with practiced instinct, her heel skimming its edge as she climbed the second floor. The wood still groaned beneath the pressure, same place Greg had stomped up and down with his arms full of Amanda's boxes, as if the house should have thanked them for the weight. She didn't mutter, didn't sigh. Instead, she pressed a small orange sticker along the handrail, just beneath the new crack that hadn't been there last fall. Downstairs, the front door creaked open and Tina's voice cut through the dust. Starting in, "The kitchen," she called, her camera already clicking. Dorothy circled back to the landing, clipboard in hand, notes scrawled in sharp block letters. Banister split, unsafe. Cabinet hinge snapped, bottom left. Nail polish on hardwood by guest bath. Pink, still tacky. By the time she made it to the kitchen, Tina had finished the lower cabinets and was now angling for light near the ceiling fan, where a cluster of grease specks dappled the drywall. "Shall I catch the garden next?" Tina asked, checking her battery. Dorothy gave a nod. "The hydrangeas are dead. He never watered them." Tina gave a low whistle. "This disclosure form's going to be a novel. They'll want honesty." Dorothy glanced out the window. The lawn looked like something out of a foreclosure, patchy, tired. The mower lines faded like old regrets. "Better they hear it from me than the buyer's inspector." Tina zipped up her camera bag. "You're being thorough." "No," Dorothy said. "I'm being fair." He always confused the two. She stood in the center of the living room, taking it in. The shadow stains on the carpet where a plant had once leaked for months. The gouge on the wall from Amanda's overstuffed bookshelf. A candle burn on the mantel. Wax still ghosted into the stone. It wasn't a crime scene. Just neglect, piled like sediment. Ruth arrived just after noon, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder and a yellow legal pad tucked beneath her arm. "You ready to inventory?" Dorothy exhaled through her nose. "As I'll ever be." They moved room to room in silence, occasionally pausing to debate whether a certain throw blanket had been Dorothy's or a recent addition. A few decisions were too sharp to touch, like the antique end table Bill had bought on a whim after his gallbladder surgery. Ruth traced its leg with her finger and didn't comment on the circular water stain marring its surface now. "Write it down," Dorothy said, voice low. "If it's ruined, it's still mine." When they finished, Ruth packed the list away and lingered by the front door. "You okay?" she asked. "No," Dorothy said plainly. "But I'm clear." That night, after Ruth had gone and Tina's photos were uploaded, Dorothy sat at the dining room table with her laptop and began a new spreadsheet. At the top, she typed the words in bold. What I bought. What they took for granted. Row by row, the list unfolded. Not with bitterness, but precision. Le Creuset Dutch oven, cracked. Guest towels, used as dog bedding. Family iMac, wiped and regifted to Amanda's nephew. Dining chair cushions, coffee stains, ripped seam. Each entry was paired with a cost and a final column. Left it anyway. Emily appeared in the doorway sometime after midnight, hair messy, arms folded tight across her chest. Dorothy didn't look up. "You're making a ledger?" she asked. "A record," Dorothy replied. Emily stepped into the room slowly, glancing at the screen. Her face shifted between guilt and curiosity. "I'll get my things out," she said softly, "before it gets ugly." Dorothy saved the document and finally met her eyes. 48 hours, that's all. Emily hesitated. "You mean it?" "I'm not bluffing anymore, Emmy. That's what got us here." Her daughter nodded, eyes glassy but dry. "Okay." Dorothy watched her walk upstairs, the tension trailing behind her like smoke. She didn't follow. She closed the laptop, stood, and poured herself a half glass of wine. Then she picked up the envelope Greg had left behind weeks ago, empty now except for a scrap of receipt. She held it to the light, a gas station slip, dated 3 days before Amanda's birthday. On the back, scribbled in Greg's frantic scrawl, "Fix railing, she's pissed." Dorothy folded it once, then again, and dropped it into the trash. Upstairs, something crashed to the floor. A drawer, maybe, or a box Emily had misjudged. Dorothy didn't move, not until the doorbell rang. The doorbell rang again, longer this time. Then silence. Dorothy didn't move from the kitchen. On the counter beside her wine glass, her phone buzzed to life and spun gently on the marble. The screen lit with a name that hadn't shown up since the funeral. Greg Carver voicemail. Then another, and a third. She watched each one blink away like a warning light she no longer owed attention to. Only when the buzzing stopped did she pick up the phone, tap once, and forward the newest voicemail to Mark with the subject line, "No contact, please advise." She poured the rest of the wine down the sink. The response came less than an hour later. Mark's email was clipped. Factual, weaponized with subtle precision. Per client's request, all communication regarding the property must proceed through legal channels. Any attempt to circumvent formal process will be treated as harassment and responded to accordingly. Do not contact her again. Dorothy read it once, then deleted the thread. At Ruth's house, morning came too early and too loud. Outside, a rusted Subaru idled like an accusation. Greg's voice carried before he even rang the bell. His footsteps heavy on the porch planks, Amanda's heels clacking unevenly behind him. Ruth, in a fleece robe and no makeup, opened the front door halfway and filled the frame like a drawbridge. Greg blinked at her, caught mid-sentence. "Is Dorothy here?" "She's not accepting visitors." Amanda pushed forward, her voice sharp. "We just flew back early for this. You're telling me she's hiding?" Ruth didn't flinch. "She's resting." Greg shifted, hands on his hips. "Look, this whole stunt's gotten out of hand. We just want to—" "No," Ruth cut in. "You want to rewrite. Dorothy doesn't owe you an audience." Amanda's laugh was brittle. "She's unstable. You know that, right? She's emotional. She needs help, not some ego boost." Ruth stepped out and pulled the door almost shut behind her. The cold hit fast, but she stood steady. "No," she said. "She's just done." Greg opened his mouth, then seemed to forget what indignation should sound like. He glanced at Amanda, but she was already staring daggers past Ruth into the house, as if she could summon Dorothy out with will alone. "You're playing gatekeeper now," Amanda snapped. "You think she's better off with you making decisions for her?" "I'm not making decisions," Ruth said, voice low. "I'm making coffee." She turned and closed the door with the finality of a gavel. Inside, Dorothy was seated at the kitchen table, still in her nightshirt, mug in hand. She hadn't moved the entire time. "I heard Amanda," she said. "I didn't let her finish," Ruth replied, setting down a second mug. "She came for blood, not truth." Dorothy nodded slowly, eyes locked on the grain of the table. "It's strange. They keep acting like I changed. Like this is some version of me they've never met before." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "You didn't change. You just stopped translating." For a while, they drank in silence, the kind between women who've earned it. Then Dorothy stood and walked to the living room, opened her laptop, and pulled up the lock change invoice. Paid in full. Time stamped. A new message appeared as she scrolled. An alert from the real estate portal. "New showing request. Tuesday, 2 p.m. Confirm?" Dorothy clicked accept. Outside, the Subaru hadn't moved. Amanda sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, mouthing something furiously as Greg scrolled through his phone, pacing beside the car like a tethered animal. Dorothy watched from behind the curtain, unseen. Inside her inbox, a new email arrived from Emily. Subject: "I'm out, left my key under the mat. I won't be back." No sign-off, no emojis, just a quiet, typed line that looked more like a severance than a goodbye. Dorothy stood frozen, hands still on the mouse, the cursor blinking over those 6 words. She didn't cry. But somewhere behind her breastbone, something cracked open like a window unlatched for the first time in years. Downstairs, the front porch creaked again. A knock, then another. This time, it wasn't Greg. The man at the real estate office wore a navy suit that had never seen a wrinkle, let alone a life unraveling. His handshake was quick, efficient, the kind that said congratulations even when no one smiled. Dorothy slid the contract across the table without ceremony. Her pen left a small tremor in the final loop of her signature, Dorothy Elaine Carver, clear and alone. No cosigner. No ghost. The buyers, a young couple with matching glasses and soft voices, sat across from her, their agent sandwiched between them like a chaperone. The wife held a file of Pinterest printouts. The husband asked about tree removal permits. They didn't ask her why she was selling. She was grateful for that. Closing is in 3 weeks, the agent said, but they're requesting early access to start staging. Light prep work, nothing invasive. Dorothy didn't flinch. Tell them yes. The house was already gone in her mind, just a shell with memories painted over. That night, Dorothy packed with the steadiness of a woman who knew where everything went, even when it no longer had a place. She labeled boxes for donation, storage, or trash. A separate pile she marked Emily, even though she doubted she'd come to collect it. She left the upstairs untouched, save for the closet where she pulled out the last of Bill's winter coats. She didn't open the garment bag, just ran her hand down the thick canvas, folded it once, and laid it gently in the trunk of her car. By morning, she had booked a furnished senior condo near the Arboretum. Month to month. No pets, no drama, utilities included. The leasing agent had called her Miss Carver, which she hadn't heard since the Reagan administration. It made her laugh for exactly 1 second longer than it should have. Mark delivered the final notice by courier. It was brief, unflinching. Notice of final vacancy. Per legal settlement terms and mutual agreements, remaining parties must vacate premises within 5 days of delivery. No extensions, no exceptions. He sent her a scanned copy with the subject line, "Final round." She replied with 2 words, "Thank you." 5 days. That was the last grace she'd ever offer them. The day after the notice landed, her phone lit up with Emily's name. The text was a screenshot first, Amanda's Facebook post, half rant, half pity parade. Something about elder abuse and stolen inheritance and narcissistic behavior. Underneath it came Emily's actual message. "They're furious, but I'm proud of you." Dorothy sat on the edge of the bed in the near-empty guest room, the phone resting against her palm like a truce offering. Her reply came slower, measured, earned. "Thank you, I'm proud of me too." She didn't reread it. She didn't need to. On Thursday morning, Ruth helped her carry the last box to the car. A single file marked "Wills and Otherwise" sat atop it. Ruth tapped the lid with 2 fingers. "You ready?" "Not really," Dorothy said, "but that hasn't stopped me before." She turned back one final time. The house looked smaller now, stripped and hollowed. The porch light still flickered, like it always had. She hadn't fixed it. She didn't intend to. At the edge of the walkway, she paused and slid the new key under the mat. Out of habit, not hope. By the time she reached the car, her breath had steadied again. She drove herself to the condo with the windows cracked just enough to let the air sting. She didn't look back, not even once. That evening, in the sterile quiet of her new kitchen, she unpacked a single wine glass, rinsed it carefully, and poured half a pour, not a toast, just a moment. Then her phone buzzed once on the counter. Unknown number, voicemail. She didn't touch it right away, but something about the air shifted, tightened. She picked it up. Voicemail transcribed. "You think you've won, but you don't even know what you started. Check the basement. I left something for you." No name, no callback number, just static at the end. Dorothy set the phone down slowly. Then she stood, grabbed her coat, and turned toward the door. Dorothy left the voicemail behind like a cigarette she never smoked. Tempting, dangerous, pointless. She didn't go back to the house. Not then. Not because he told her to. Instead, she drove straight to the bank. The branch manager, a polite man with the tired eyes of someone who'd shepherded more divorces than mortgages, offered her a private room and a glass of lukewarm water. Dorothy declined both. She slid the closing check across the desk, her thumb pressed briefly against the edge, as if to take one last fingerprint of the life it represented. "I want it deposited into a trust-controlled account," she said, "under my full legal name. No co-owners, no beneficiaries yet." The manager nodded, tapping at his keyboard. "We'll flag it as protected. Do you want spending restrictions?" Dorothy didn't answer right away. Her eyes lingered on the monitor. "Only on grief," she said. Then, softly, "No, I'll know what to do." By the time she left the bank, the wind had picked up. sharp, dry, unforgiving in a way that felt almost medicinal. She drove to a second institution, this one smaller, humbler, nestled between a daycare center and a payday loan place with paper signs flapping in the window. Inside, she set up a separate account. Quiet, modest. No announcement made, no text sent. She named it Emily Education Fund and locked it behind a 2-factor password that no one else would ever guess. Not even Ruth, not even Emily. I want it to grow, she told the teller. Not fast, just faithfully. Later that afternoon, she pulled into the cracked parking lot behind a converted church, the one now serving as a transitional housing office for women who'd left worse than Greg. Inside, the receptionist greeted her with a weary but earnest smile. Dorothy handed over a folded check inside a plain envelope. $10,000, she said. No paperwork. Just use it where it counts. The receptionist blinked. Do you want a receipt? Or a thank you letter? No, Dorothy said. Just fewer locks between women and their exits. She turned before the woman could answer. At the condo, her laptop hummed on the kitchen counter, waiting. Dorothy poured herself a splash of cranberry juice, no wine tonight, and opened her digital life like a surgeon, calm, clean, decisive. She found the last remnants of her old estate plan, beneficiary designations, outdated accounts, emergency contacts. Greg's name was still listed on 2 of them, Amanda's on 1. She deleted them with a flick of a cursor. No anger, just finality, like sweeping a dusty corner after a long winter. When she hit save, the screen blinked once. No confirmation, no fanfare, just freedom. The next morning, she walked down the condo hallway in fleece-lined slippers and checked the mailbox by the leasing office. Inside was a small bundle of redirected mail, a coupon flyer, and a note from USPS confirming her forwarding address. She tucked it all beneath her arm. At her door stood Joan, a neighbor she hadn't officially met, but had nodded to twice near the elevator. Retired nurse. Elbows like steel, voice like bourbon. Joan held a rectangular object wrapped in brown paper. Figured you might need one of these, she said, handing it over. Dorothy peeled the tape carefully. Inside was a thick, rubber-backed welcome mat. But instead of welcome, the lettering read, "Not for guests." She stared at it, then barked out a laugh so loud Joan flinched. I love it, Dorothy said. You don't have to use it, Joan added. Oh, I will, and I'll mean it. That night, Dorothy stood barefoot at the edge of her new balcony, sipping from a ceramic mug Ruth had dropped off days earlier. The city lights spread out below her like a map of roads she didn't have to take anymore. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from the bank. The deposit had cleared. The trust was fully funded. She took a long breath, let it out slow. Then, just as she turned to go back inside, her phone vibrated again. Unknown number, 1 new image, no message, no text, just a photo. It loaded slowly, pixel by pixel. A shot of the house, dark, basement door wide open, and spray painted in red across the inside wall. You left something behind. Dorothy stared at the screen. Her hand didn't shake, but her heart, it did. The printer groaned like it resented being part of this. Dorothy stood over it in her kitchen, arms folded, eyes on the glossy sheet rolling out inch by inch. Amanda's Facebook post filled the top half. A close-up selfie, Amanda tear-streaked, mascara smudged just enough to look accidental. The caption was a masterstroke of deflection. No matter how hard you try, some people will rewrite history just to feel powerful. We only ever wanted to help. We loved her. She knows that. 68 likes, 22 comments. Some from mutual acquaintances. One from a woman Dorothy hadn't spoken to since Emily's baby shower. You're in my prayers, Amanda. Family is complicated. Keep your heart soft. Dorothy didn't cry, didn't even blink. She slid the printout into a clear binder sleeve behind a labeled tab. Contested narrative, documented. She closed the binder with a flat snap, then opened her laptop. Mark's reply had already come in, precise as ever. They'll try the manipulation route now. Stay the course. Emotion is their leverage. Yours is documentation. Let it work for you. Below the email, he had attached a PDF titled Tactics of Emotional Undermining in Estate Disputes. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Instead, she opened her phone settings, scrolled to contacts, and tapped edit beside Greg's name. A heartbeat later, Amanda's. Then finally, block this caller. Confirm? Confirm. She went through messages next. Social platforms, the family chat thread that hadn't been active since Bill's bypass surgery. Delete, block, archive. No more threads, no more crumbs. Let them scream into the algorithm. She'd already changed the locks on her attention. 2 days passed. Then an email slid into her inbox like a leaf blown in through a cracked window. Subject, update, from Emily C., university account. It was simple, terse even. Mom, I've locked my personal accounts for now. Everything goes through this email from here on out. Safer that way. I didn't know they'd do that to the basement. I'm sorry. Dorothy read it twice. She didn't reply, not out of malice, but timing. Some messages needed to breathe before they were answered. Some apologies had to sit alone for a while, the way ice has to crack before water can settle again. She slid the email into a subfolder titled Ongoing Repair. Then she made tea. Late Thursday afternoon, Tina's name lit up her screen. The subject line read, Final image. Congratulations. Dorothy clicked. It was a high-resolution photo, wide angle, backlit by winter sun, showing the front of the house, freshly power-washed, porch empty, driveway clear. In the corner of the frame, the lockbox had been removed. The key sat atop the railing like a farewell, with nothing left to say. And at the bottom, a handwritten placard propped on the stoop, sold, occupants removed, no forwarding address provided. Dorothy's cursor hovered over the image for a full minute before she hit download. She printed it on glossy paper, trimmed the edge, and slid it into the final tab of her binder, title in neat Sharpie, Proof of Peace. She placed the binder on the top shelf of her closet, not hidden, just above reach, something she could revisit if memory ever turned soft again. That night, the condo was quiet. A storm rolled low on the horizon, distant thunder, no rain. Dorothy turned off every light but one. In the faint blue glow of her laptop, she scrolled through archived messages. Nothing new until a new email. No subject line, no name, just a timestamp. 1:17 a.m. She opened it. The body was blank, but there was an attachment. IMGZETS 47.jpg. She hesitated, then clicked. It opened slowly. The same photo Tina had sent, same angle, same light. Except now, in red Sharpie scrawled across the front door, "We're not finished." Dorothy stared at it, her hand steady. She didn't reach for her phone. She reached for the binder. Dorothy opened the door before Emily had a chance to knock. There was no need for ceremony. The hallway was quiet, padded in beige carpeting, and the faint scent of pot roast from someone's slow cooker 2 units down. Emily stood there, shoulders hunched beneath a slate gray hoodie, her eyes rimmed with sleep but clearer than Dorothy had seen in months. In her left hand, a zippered tote. In her right, nothing for once. Not her phone, not a defense. Dorothy stepped aside. No one said a word until the door clicked shut behind them. Then slowly, Emily turned and folded into her mother's arms. The hug was short, frail, almost clumsy, but full. Dorothy felt the sharp edge of Emily's keys press against her hip. Emily felt the rhythm of her mother's breath, not rushed, not stiff, just present. When they pulled apart, Dorothy nodded toward the hallway. "I was just heading down for coffee. You hungry?" Emily managed to smile. "Only if they still have those cinnamon rolls you used to smuggle in your purse," Dorothy chuckled, unlocking the condo door behind them. "One of my lesser crimes." The cafe sat beneath the complex's west wing, a converted corner unit with chalkboard menus and jazz playing soft over the speakers. Dorothy ordered for both of them, without asking, black coffee. 1 cinnamon roll, split. They found a table near the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered through a gray drizzle. Inside, the air was warm, scented with cinnamon and a touch of almond extract from something baking behind the counter. Emily picked at the roll with delicate fingers, as if it might disappear. Dorothy didn't rush her. Eventually, Emily said, "I want to learn how you did it, how you knew when enough was enough." Dorothy didn't answer right away. She sipped her coffee, watching the rain beat against the glass. It wasn't one moment, she said quietly. It was all of them. Emily swallowed hard. I think I missed most of them. No, Dorothy said gently. You just weren't ready to name them yet. For a long moment, they sat in that pause. Not silence. This had weight, like an open drawer finally being emptied. Dorothy reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no letterhead, no sentiment, just a notarized trust clause. She slid it across the table. Emily opened it slowly, her breath catching as she read her name, Emily Christine Carver, printed in bold next to the line, sole educational beneficiary, non-revocable. Discretionary clause retained by trustee. D.E. Carver. Emily looked up, mouth parted slightly. You already did this? Dorothy nodded. Before you even emailed. I wanted you to know that, whatever they said, it didn't touch this. Tears welled, sudden and hot. Emily wiped one with her sleeve, shaking her head. I don't deserve this. It's not about deserving, Dorothy said. It's about choosing what I want to build now that they're gone. Emily held the paper like it might burn through her hands. I was so afraid, she whispered, that I was going to lose both of you. Dorothy reached out and covered her daughter's hand. You didn't lose me. You just had to come find me on your own terms. Across the cafe, someone scraped a chair back. The espresso machine hissed. Life kept moving. Emily folded the paper neatly and tucked it into her coat. Her hands were still shaking. Dorothy noticed. She also noticed the moment Emily's eyes flicked toward the front window, where a dark blue sedan idled across the street. Unmoving, unblinking. Dorothy didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. Instead, she whispered, "Let them watch." Emily's voice was quieter than steam. They followed me, didn't they? Dorothy took one last sip of coffee. Then she stood. Let's go, she said, calm but deliberate. You're not going back out there alone. As they walked toward the elevator, Emily glanced over her shoulder. The sedan was gone, but the feeling wasn't. The envelope was thick, legal weight stock, crisp edges, the kind meant to impress or intimidate, depending on who opened it. Dorothy didn't. She dropped it, unopened, into a manila folder already labeled "If They Try Again" and carried it straight to Mark's office the next morning. He met her in the waiting area, tie loose, coffee in one hand, reading glasses perched low like a tired hawk. She held it out without a word. He didn't ask, just nodded once and slipped it under his arm. By the time she returned home, the email had arrived. Subject: Response to Carver inquiry. Your client has no claim to property or funds. All transfers were lawful and final. Do not contact our office again. Dorothy read it only once, then archived it under the same digital folder as the voicemail transcript and Amanda's Facebook post. She didn't forward it to Emily, didn't mention it to Ruth. She simply removed the envelope from her physical folder, tore it down the center, and dropped it into the condo's locked shred bin, like it had never existed at all. No more letters came. Not from Greg, not from Amanda, not from whatever lawyer they'd scraped off the bottom of a billboard. Silence, at last, had a sound she could trust. The next appointment had been scheduled months earlier, a routine checkup with her internist at Mercy Medical. But now it felt less like obligation and more like reinforcement. After the blood work and questions about diet, sleep, and family history, Dorothy handed over a single stapled packet. Updated directive, she said. Advanced care, power of attorney, all of it. Dr. Tran flipped through the pages with a clinical eye. You've listed your daughter. Emily Christine Carver, Dorothy confirmed. Full authority, and I want the previous version pulled. The one where Greg Carver was listed as the emergency contact. Blacklist him from the file. He's not to be notified under any circumstance. Dr. Tran didn't blink. She nodded, initialed a corner, and set the documents in the outgoing tray. It's done. I'll update your chart today. Dorothy exhaled slowly. Good. Thank you. When she reached the parking garage, she didn't start the car right away. She sat with the key in the ignition, staring straight ahead, listening to the soft tick-tick of her hazard light blinking behind someone else's bumper. She didn't cry, but she did smile, not wide, not giddy, just steady. Ruth stopped by later that evening. She brought Thai food, a folding bottle of white wine, and a soft cardigan she claimed was too long for my arms but perfect for yours. They sat on the couch with their paper containers open between them, legs tucked under like girls in a college dorm, except older, braver, and a hell of a lot smarter. Dorothy poked at her pad CU with a plastic fork, not quite eating. He said once, Greg, that I needed too much, that I pulled him down. Ruth's eyes narrowed, but she didn't interrupt. I think I believed him back then, Dorothy continued, that I was extra weight, a woman who needed taming. Ruth set down her wine. You were never his burden, Dot. Dorothy met her gaze. Ruth's voice softened, not pitying, just precise. He just didn't know how to honor the foundation. Outside, wind pressed against the windows, not fierce, just persistent. Dorothy reached for the new cardigan and draped it over her shoulders. Funny, she murmured. How the right weight feels like shelter. Ruth smiled into her wine. Try the curry, it'll knock you sideways. They both laughed. And for the first time in weeks, Dorothy let it linger. The next morning, the intercom buzzed. Unscheduled. Unfamiliar. She stepped to the monitor and pressed the view button. The screen blinked. Then resolved. A delivery man, holding a flat package. No return address, no logo. She pressed the door release. He was already gone by the time she reached the lobby. Just the package on the bench. Inside, a single framed photo. The house again, but from inside the living room this time. On the floor, in the beam of sunlight near the fireplace, something small and white. A wedding band. Next to it, scrawled on a torn piece of yellow legal pad. You forgot who you are. Dorothy didn't move, didn't speak. She just turned the frame face down and locked the lobby door behind her. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Cream-colored, heavy, sealed too perfectly. The handwriting, Greg's, unmistakably slanted upward in its familiar arrogance, like it had somewhere more important to be. Dorothy held it between two fingers, careful not to let the paper pick up her scent. No stamp of urgency, no lawyer's watermark, just her name and the condo's new address, centered in the same looping script that had once signed checks, birthday cards, and the back of a joint mortgage. She didn't even need to ask what was inside. It would be explanation disguised as remorse, or maybe memory repackaged as warning. Either way, it wasn't for her anymore. She pulled the red ink pad from the junk drawer, pressed the rubber stamp against it, and brought it down hard across the front. Return to sender. No longer at this address. The words bled through faintly on the reverse side, marking the paper like a quiet exorcism. Dorothy let it dry, then slipped it into the outgoing slot of the lobby mailbox without ceremony. No hesitation, no glance back. It hit the metal with a clean, echoing clink. She exhaled, a full breath, the kind that starts in the ribs and finishes in the soles of your feet. The cleanest breath she'd taken in a year. That evening, the city had one of those dusks that forgets how to turn into night. Lavender light smeared across the horizon, everything soft-edged and forgiving. Dorothy stood barefoot on the balcony, a light sweater over her shoulders, the hum of the traffic below sounding almost like ocean surf if you didn't listen too closely. In her hands, folded twice and faintly creased at the corners, was Emily's last note. Just a short letter, typed and printed, the kind people send when they want their words to last longer than a signal. Mom, thank you for showing me that peace isn't the same thing as surrender. I'm learning. I really am. Love you, E. Dorothy smiled softly, running her thumb over the line breaks. She'd already read it 5 times, but it still landed differently each pass, like new air through an old house. When she finished, she walked inside, flipped her calendar to December, and tucked the letter behind it. Not hidden, just waiting, a promise for later. At 7, she opened her laptop and searched for something she'd never thought to before. Restaurants near me. Quiet. No reservations required. Then, on impulse, she clicked Book Table for 1. The confirmation email appeared seconds later, small, polite, almost shy. Thursday, 7:30 p.m. Table for 1, window seat, her first reservation under her own name, for her own company. She poured herself a splash of red wine and toasted the empty room. To peace, she murmured, and to whoever thought it was theirs to take. Her reflection in the balcony glass lifted its own invisible glass back. When she set the wine down, she noticed something out of place near the mail basket by the door. A slip of paper, thin, grayish, half-tucked under the mat Joan had given her months ago. Not for guests. Dorothy bent to pick it up. It was a torn piece of envelope corner, the rest missing. Scrawled in the same unmistakable hand. "You don't get to forget." Dorothy stared for a long moment, the sound of her pulse sharp in her ears. Then she straightened, tore the fragment clean down the middle, and fed both halves into the garbage disposal. The grind was brief, final. When the noise stopped, the only sound left was the steady hum of her own breathing, quiet, certain, alive. She turned off the kitchen light and stepped toward the window, where the city glittered like 1,000 open futures. Her phone buzzed once on the counter, unknown number. No message, no voicemail, just a missed call. And then, nothing. The kitchen was empty, gleaming in ways Dorothy hadn't expected. Countertops scrubbed to a quiet shine, a pale blue kettle sitting untouched on the stove, cabinets waiting without demand. It didn't feel unfinished, it felt cleared. She stood near the sink, hands folded lightly in front of her, blouse tucked just so. It wasn't a formal day, but something about it still asked for polish. She'd even worn earrings, tiny pearl studs, nothing showy, but the kind she used to save for dinner parties she no longer hosted. Tina stood by the entryway, camera in hand. "Okay," she said, adjusting the focus. "Let's try one where you're not standing like a librarian who just turned in her keys." Dorothy smiled. "I am a librarian who turned in her keys." "Sure," Tina said, grinning. "But now you're the hostess who disappeared her guests. Give me that face." Dorothy laughed, full and sudden, and Tina snapped the photo mid-breath. Head tilted back slightly, eyes lit from somewhere real. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like a defense mechanism. It felt like a reaction. It felt like her. Tina lowered the camera. "That's the one." "You sure you don't want a before and after?" Dorothy teased. "Maybe me with a crowbar and a broken lock." "Tempting," Tina said, already flipping through the shots. "But I'm saving those ideas for the memoir cover." Dorothy walked over and peered at the screen. The image was clean, her standing in the quiet curve of her new space, framed by light. Her body relaxed in a way that said this belongs to me without her having to say a word. The new listing binder, one Tina had put together as a keepsake of the sale, sat on the counter nearby. Inside, photos, receipts, letters, even the final title transfer. On the last page, beneath the image of the old house with the lockbox removed, Tina had printed a single caption in all caps: "Sold by owner. Story not included." Dorothy ran a finger under the words, like underlining something in a library book she didn't intend to return. Later that afternoon, Ruth arrived with a narrow black frame tucked under one arm and 2 iced coffees she insisted were medicinal. "Got something for your wall," she said, kicking off her shoes with one foot while balancing the drinks. Dorothy opened the frames back carefully. Inside was the kitchen photo, Tina's favorite. Dorothy mid-laugh, arms loose, the light kissing her collarbone like it had chosen her, not the other way around. "I thought you'd want one where you're not haunted," Ruth said gently. Dorothy traced the edge of the frame. "I want it on the hallway wall, where you have to see it before you leave." "That's a power move," Ruth said, grinning. "No," said another voice, softer. Emily stood in the doorway, holding her phone, a quiet awe in her expression as she looked at the picture. "That's what power looks like." Dorothy turned to her, one brow raised. Emily walked over and tapped the photo gently. "It's not a fight, not a face-off. It's just still. That's what I never understood before. Power doesn't always roar." Dorothy leaned against the counter, watching her daughter. "It looks like rest," she said. They stood together a moment, 3 women and a picture that needed no caption. That night, Dorothy slid the frame into place just outside her bedroom door. She stepped back, looked once, then again. It fit. Not because it was centered, but because she was. As she turned out the hallway light, her phone buzzed from the kitchen counter. No caller ID, no preview, just a text bubble waiting. She walked toward it slowly, the shadows stretching long across the floor. The screen read, "You erased me, but I remember everything." Dorothy didn't reply. She didn't need to. She simply reached for the photo again and hung a second frame beside it. This one empty, for whatever came next. The cafe didn't serve turkey. That was part of the draw. No cranberry glaze, no pumpkin spice special, no strained smiles over chipped gravy boats. Just coffee, folded napkins, and the sound of real plates clinking in a quiet room where no one asked if you were waiting for someone. Dorothy sat near the window, her coat draped over the back of the chair, scarf still knotted loosely at her neck. The waitress, young and kind-eyed, offered the specials in a whisper. Dorothy chose a spinach quiche and rye toast. No sides. No performance. The couple at the next table debated movies in hushed tones. A boy at the counter folded paper napkins into cranes, one after the other. Outside, the river trail gleamed with that washed silver light that only late November knows, somewhere between cold and kind. Her phone buzzed once against the tabletop. Just a short message. "Emily, you were the home all along." Dorothy stared at the screen until the edges of her eyes blurred. No emojis, no filler, just truth. She didn't write back. She didn't have to. After brunch, she pulled her coat tighter and stepped onto the trail. The river moved slow beside her, brown and steady, dotted with the first thin films of ice near the bank. Her boots made soft, rhythmic sounds against the gravel. A family passed on bicycles. Laughter flared, then faded. Dorothy kept walking. The wind pressed into her face like a question she no longer needed to answer. She didn't count her steps. She didn't map her route. She simply moved forward. She hadn't brought gloves, and her fingers turned pink in the chill. She liked the sting. It reminded her she was still here. By the time she returned to the condo, dusk had started to climb through the buildings like ivy. She kicked off her shoes, shrugged off her coat, and lit the small glass candle Ruth had brought her last month, fig and cedar, with a wick that hissed faintly at first, then settled. She made no effort to check the mail. Whatever waited behind the brass slot would still be waiting tomorrow. Or not. The condo was quiet, small, tidy, unshared, fully hers. She padded barefoot into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and took the candle into the living room. The framed photo still hung in the hallway, her laugh caught mid-breath. A woman not surviving but living. Beside it, the empty frame remained untouched. She liked it there, proof that not every space had to be filled to have meaning. Dorothy sat on the couch, feet tucked under her, the candle flickering beside her on the end table. Outside, the city moved on without her. No one knocked, no one called. And that, she realized, was the victory. Not revenge, not erasure, just silence. On her terms. She thought back to the last, Thanksgiving at the old house, the good dishes out, Amanda arriving late on purpose, Emily offering to mash the potatoes, trying to buffer the air. Greg had stood at the head of the table, wine glass lifted, not with warmth but performance. He'd looked down the length of the table and said with a smirk, "Mom's just a guest here now, right?" A few people chuckled. Dorothy hadn't. She remembered placing her fork down gently and excusing herself to the laundry room, where she stood for 10 full minutes, staring at the humming dryer like it might spin her life back to a shape she recognized. She remembered thinking, then I'll stop being a guest. I'll stop being anything they can host. And so she had. She sipped her water, closed her eyes. At Thanksgiving, my son said, "You're just a guest here now." So I made sure he'd never have a home to invite anyone to, and I never needed a seat at his table again. The candle danced beside her, warm, steady, untouchable.